No, it's genius. I've been saying for years that there are going to be thousands of companies that follow that blueprint. Watch.
Well, Reddit is now doing it.
Yep.
I'm sure plenty of others.
Yep. Preston was doing the math on it. Like Preston had a tweet the other day where he was basically saying that in the last, I don't know, 48 hours or whatever it's been, MicroStrategy's value has gone up something like $750 million, which is the equivalent of like 14 years worth of them selling software or some shit.
Yeah, somebody was saying like I think this was in a Spaces or something, but they were like he couldn't sell enough of their product to make how much they've made just from the Bitcoin allocation.
Yeah, it'd be impossible.
Like that's just, and how can any other company, especially I think like, you know, the big companies, they're just going to stick to their game plan. They're going to stick to their strategy. But why wouldn't you? Yeah, but why, if you're a smaller company, like why wouldn't you take advantage of that?
Brother, if they don't shift gears, there's going to come a time when MSTR passes them in market cap.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're going to have to fucking pay attention.
Well, that was one of the lines in the end of The Sovereign Individual, was how like the radicals always win because there's the tradition, there's the people that just stick with the same game plan no matter how much writing is on the wall, that like phase of society is over. And so that's how every revolution happens, is it is the people that are considered radical are really just like understanding the current environment, and taking advantage of it, and they end up succeeding.
Yeah, they see the step function that's about to occur, and they basically front run that thing. That's what it is. Are we live?
Yeah, we are now.
Yeah, I was sneaky about it.
Very sneaky. What's up?
We started talking. It was a good conversation. I was like, all right, the people need to hear this. But you know, there's a saying in the military, Max. You know, if you're on time, you're late, and so you got to be 15 minutes early to be on time. And so that's kind of how we run things. But again, this is just like the pre-show. We're BSing.
That's excellent. I want to know if MicroStrategies, do their investors benefit from their holding all that Bitcoin, or is it just an asset to them that balloons?
Well, wouldn't it be both? I think because they're holding shares, which is a fractional beneficial ownership in the assets of the company, is really what it comes down to, right? So,
well, if Apple holds cash, which they do a lot, right? They stick that cash. Do investors don't benefit from that, do they, or do they?
Well, the cash is an asset on the company's balance sheet, right?
Okay.
Just like the buildings are, just like the warehouses are, just like the server data centers are. It's all company assets.
Yeah. So if it's a public company, the shares are going to be based on the value of the company, and if the cash reserves double, like they have for MSTR,
that goes into calculating the value of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now here's the thing, though. This is out on the flip side of that equation is that like Saylor's playbook has been to generate cash any way he can to buy more Bitcoin, basically, which means leverage loans, issuing more stock, all that kind of stuff. Some people are like, well, he's going to dilute the stock and buy more Bitcoin. Yeah, probably. But the thing to remember about that is that like, he's front running everybody doing this. There's nobody else basically doing this, right? Somebody mentioned Reddit, but they're just doing it to a tiny degree. I've said for years that like there are going to be thousands of companies that follow this playbook. You're going to see, my opinion, in the years to come, you will see central banks following this playbook. They're going to print money. They're going to buy Bitcoin.
Well, isn't that what Snowden just like kind of hinted at? I don't know if he has any actual information or if he was just like predicting it, but he was like, prediction that there is a nation out there currently buying Bitcoin to put in their reserves, but they haven't released that information publicly.
Yeah, I think it's I speculate that it's speculation.
I'd agree with that.
I've been wondering what you guys think about Maxis in particular, about all these ETFs suddenly holding Bitcoin. It's a manner, in a manner of speaking, it's a way of centralizing it that should make us feel uncomfortable, and yet it also means number go up in time. Or if you have, I mean, paradoxically, I think what would be better is if you had a bunch of sovereign wealth funds and they just bought a bunch of Bitcoin and stuck it in their sovereign wealth funds. If every tin pot dictatorship in the world did that at 2 or 3%,
yeah. So the way I look at it,
to that.
yeah, the way I look at it is it's not centralizing Bitcoin. What it is it's a Trojan horse that is opening the floodgates to the largest capital market in the world, which is the United States of America. Because what it is centralizing is those keys to that Bitcoin, but that's not centralizing Bitcoin itself. Keep in mind that keys are really just your permission to move Bitcoin from one address on a blockchain to another, right? That's all the keys are. So sure, you've got a certain amount of Bitcoin that's controlled by keys that maybe arguably are centralized, but you're not centralizing Bitcoin any more than I mean, the blockchain still exists on hundreds of thousands of nodes spread out all over the world and on satellites, right? So that doesn't centralize Bitcoin anymore. What it does do is possibly put some small percentage, and at this point, it's a very small percentage of Bitcoin into centralized key management, which doesn't. I don't consider that an attack on the network.
Coinbase. I think Coinbase is working with at least BlackRock. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, what is really happening here? Like, this is like it's just a continuation of what's been happening for the last probably, I don't know, 30 years, which is the dematerialization of things into essentially digital form.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a continuation of that arc. And, you're watching commercial real estate. The commercial real estate market in the United States of America is a goddamn dumpster fire. You're seeing buildings selling at like 80% discount. I saw this one, like, when I see these things, I retweet them or I reshare them, because I saw this one beautiful office building, right, on its own campus, all this other kind of stuff, $9 a square foot.
That's nuts.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And you have this massive premium, because here's the problem. The United States dollar is a corrupt and broken monetary system. The fiat monetary system is broken as fuck, right? So because of that, everything priced in dollars is mispriced, in my opinion, because you don't have an actual way to save. So because you don't have an actual way to save, because the money is continuously devaluing and everybody has to chase prices that are running away from them, what does everybody do? Everybody gambles. What does that mean? Everybody invests. They think they're investing, they're fucking gambling in all this stuff, whether it's real estate or equities or whatever, right? Then they're just trying to get ahead of the inflation curve. And so it's caused a massive misallocation of capital and a massive mispricing of all assets. And I think what's going to happen, we're watching it happen, is that all assets globally, I'm talking 900 trillion United States dollars worth of assets, are going to reprice over the next decade, 2 decades, 3, however long it takes. And because Bitcoin is the first asset the human race has ever seen that has a completely finite number, guess what, baby? It's going up forever, Laura. Never going to stop.
Well, and like going to your question about like how do Maxis feel about the ETF? Speaking for myself, like it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like, yeah, people might get into it and not realize like they're not actually owning the asset. They're giving a bunch of money to BlackRock so that BlackRock can own the asset, or so that Coinbase can custody it, right? But it gets those people their foot in the door, or people that were paying attention to it and are just unsure now see, like, personally, like, and this is anecdotal, but I know somebody personally who, very wealthy individual, has bought Bitcoin in the past to like just buy cigarettes from another country and pay for them and yada yada. But he, when the ETF came, like, or before that, I was kind of giving him the heads up, like, hey, I think it's gonna get approved. He's interested in buying it, but he's already kind of had a foot in the door. That's his signal, like, oh, this is gonna go up, like this is about to hit. I'm gonna go buy it, but he understands how to actually buy it, and he will probably go and buy like a shit ton of it. He's not just buying a little bit here and there. And so I think, if I know one guy, then there's a ton of other people that understand that. Yeah, there'll be people that get in and just buy the ETF, but then they'll also start wanting to know more, especially very wealthy people. They want to understand whatever their money is being invested in. They want to understand that stock or that technology, so they understand how their money's being used. And so they start learning about Bitcoin. Then they start understanding, like, oh, I just own, a paper receipt that's really kind of meaningless. I'm going to sell this and I'm going to buy the actual Bitcoin. Like that, it'll just come with time, just like a lot of people coming in and retail people buying it and leaving it on an exchange, and then FTX goes under, and then they learn, but they still along the way understood the value proposition of Bitcoin.
Right.
So it's a double-edged sword, kind of.
Yeah, it's all of that stuff that happened last year, the last couple of years, really sullied the technology in general with the centralization, with all of these. I mean, having off-ramps and on-ramps is, at this point, hard to avoid. But that the trade-off there is the centralization. And with the centralization comes somebody's holding the ring, whether that be CZ or that be Brian Armstrong or whoever. There's a lot of power there. And for Sam Bankman-Fried, obviously, that was too great a power. He got flushed out, but there were a lot of other plays, especially in DeFi, that really ruined the... People can't compartmentalize the difference between the technologies on the one hand. And I know you guys are maxis, but there are really good technologies out there for smart contracts and other things where the throughput's really high, really fast. There are good technologies out there. They're not as good as sound money as Bitcoin. Nothing is. As one of you guys said, it's the apex predator in that space, in that niche, that evolutionary niche. But with the rest of the technologies, there's so much promise to do other things that have other properties, and all of that stuff that was crypto associated, all of the NFT bubble, all of that goofy shit that was out there, excuse my mouth, like it set back the industry 5 years.
Yeah, it still is today. I mean, just yesterday, there was an article yesterday that said, "Hey, missed this latest pump? Here are 4 other altcoins that are about to pump," and it's starting again.
Yeah. It's like I want people to take people back to the. I always like to put it this way: if you go to the original Bitcoin white paper, if you read between the lines, there is a moral code there, a very important moral political code that is just oozing from that. And you can go and read Nick Szabo, or you can go read some of these other guys, and you can find vestiges of it. But what that is doing, that moral code that is sort of baked into the Bitcoin protocol, is something that we got to keep working on together. And I say we very loosely because I'm not a technologist, but I know that all of these brilliant coders who are working on NFTs, who are working on DeFi plays, who are working on all this other stuff that's garbage, and all of these investors who are trying to find the next mooning token that they know nothing about are missing it. They're missing an opportunity to do what you guys were talking about a minute ago, which is what the sovereign individual talks about. When Jordan said, we are at the cusp of another revolution, there needs to be an army of intelligent wizards backed by that morality on the cusp of that revolution.
Yep.
At the vanguard.
I agree.
There's too many shiny things, too much bullshit. And the powerful are going to catch back up if they are flat-footed.
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to incentives, and I'm really glad that you joined us tonight, Max. I'm really happy to have you here. Very excited to dig into your work and talk more about what it is you've been thinking about and writing about lately. And we will dive into that, as well as I think a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is driven often by incentives, right? Human behavior is often incentive driven. So there's reasons for all that stuff. So I'm looking forward to digging into all that. Appreciate you being here. Yeah, we're gonna kick this thing here off at exactly 7. Look at that, it's 7.
Oh, almost like we planned it.
It's almost like we planned it. Let's do it. Let's get this thing rolling, and we will dig into the meat of the discussion. Good evening and welcome to Bitcoin Veterans. We have tonight with us, our guest of honor is Max Borders, the author of Underthrow. We're going to talk to him here in just a little bit about the various things that he's got going on. But for those of you joining us new to the show, this is Bitcoin Veterans. We are obviously veterans. We're also a bunch of Bitcoiners. Max is not a full-blown Bitcoiner yet, but we're working on him here. We'll get him up to speed. And like what we're here to do is we're really here to help educate people and help people understand, mostly veterans. Like if you're out there and, you know, we find that a lot of veterans who get out of the military find themselves in the civilian workplace. And sometimes the purpose and the mission and the camaraderie and all those kind of things are just not there anymore. And we have found, those of us that have found Bitcoin, we have found a new purpose and a new hope. There's a lot of really dark stuff going on out there in the country. I'm not going to dig into that. That's Mike Hobart, Dr. Doom's speciality. So I'm going to leave that to him. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on out there. And I think guys like us tend to want to protect and help our fellow human beings. A lot of us are sheepdogs, which is what draws us to military service. Same thing with law enforcement guys, first responders, stuff like that. We understand your heart. We understand why you do what you do. So just want you to know there's a lot of hope. If you want to learn a little bit more about what we're doing, what our mission is, and why we're so enthusiastic about the future, talk to us, connect with us. We'll let you know why. I'm Alex Stanzik. I'm going to be your host tonight. Our regular host, Shane Hazel's off doing family things. He just had his birthday. I won't dox him as to how old he is, but happy birthday, brother. I have with me also Jordan Gambrell. I've got Randy Kelly. And then also we've got Mike Hobart's also one of our hosts. He's doing capitalist things this evening. And then we also have Gabriel Lord, who heads up Operation Bitcoin. He is over there in Madeira at Bitcoin Atlantis today, hanging out with a bunch of Bitcoiners. Have a little bit of FOMO, not going to lie. I'm not going to tell you who he's hanging out with, but we have a big announcement coming as to who's going to be coming on the show here pretty soon. You all know who he is. All that said, Max Borders, my man. Max is the author of The Social Singularity. He is also the founder, executive director of Social Evolution, a nonprofit organization dedicated to liberating humanity through innovation. Also the co-founder of the Voice and Exit event, former editor at the Foundation for Economic Education. Max is a futurist, a theorist, a published author, and entrepreneur. By the way, that's not your most recent book, though, is it?
No, that's a good old bio though. My most recent book is called Underthrow.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about Underthrow. What is the most recent work? And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a little bit of background. How have you obviously, in my opinion, from what I know of you, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you better, you don't think like a lot of people. You think a little bit outside the box, I would say, if that's a fair description. I'd like to know a little bit about what got you to where you're at, thinking that way.
You know, it's a funny thing. I've always been kind of obsessed with, it was somebody asked me this as a really personal question the other day, and I don't want to get all upset or emotional, but I think at some point in my life, I really realized that my grain is to, in some sense, resist systems of control or systems of manipulation. I have always, since a very young age, wanted to be in my agency, in my own sovereignty. And I sort of assume other people do as well. Now, entering adulthood, I realized that is not the case. A lot of people like to be timid herds and they like to be nudged around. But that's not me. So as I came into my own as a thinker, a writer, an intellectual, whatever, I realized that you can't just sit around and theorize all day, although that's what I love to do most. I want to just go into the stratosphere and hang out. But you also have to have embodied cognition, which is to say you have to come down and make stuff happen in the world. Now, so what I've done at a certain point in my life, and I'll try not to bang on about my life because that's kind of boring, but detouring through, I got into technology by chance around the turn of the 20th century to the 21st. I was working at a company as a sort of a cub tech writer, and I started looking at startups. And of course, this is before the tech bubble of 2000 burst. You guys are probably old enough to remember that.
Randy definitely is.
I see you, Randy. But I became fascinated with technology as an, means of instantiating creativity in the world, casting the spells through technological means. This is modern wizardry. This Bitcoin technology, Satoshi, or the team, the person, and those people who are behind that, even before we got the Bitcoin white paper in 2008, was it October 2008 or 2009?
I believe it was written in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Launched in 2009.
Yeah, we had these group of really fiercely interesting technologists. They could be a little aspy, but man, there's a creativity there, And I was into the cypherpunk types leading up before that. So I started to see how you could, and really that's why Bitcoin was so pivotal for me. Was it because it was a jarring intersection of sort of the intellectual space I had been in up to that point and my interest in technology. And those two were married to such a degree with that white paper that it was world changing. I mean, this is the printing press and people just don't realize it yet. It's that level of paradigm changing.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of my trajectory. I still like to play in theory land. I still like to write books and get people to think about things. I like to be the corpus callosum between people who are more left brain and people who are more right brain. If you get the metaphor, or in another way of putting it is, I like to people who know how to be in their bodies, warriors like you guys, who are also big brains and who know how to align head, heart, and gut in those kind of ways. These convergences make for a really interesting community. And I see that in you guys. And when Jordan reached out to me initially, I was like, hell yeah. I'm really fascinated to talk to you guys.
Awesome. Cool. Talk to us a little bit more about like Jordan. When Jordan started talking about you, he's like, hey man, I found this one guy. He's like fascinating. He's doing this stuff with decentralized. He has these ideas for decentralized communities. And like, this is largely what we're doing here with Bitcoin veterans, as you mentioned. So talk to us about like how you think about those kind of things. Like what's your framework there? Like what's the difference between, in your mind, centralized sort of top-down governance and decentralized communities? And like, why are decentralized communities a good idea at all? Because there's a lot of people who are like, well, no, like you said, there's different kinds of people, right? When you said to me, resist systems or control systems of control or manipulation, I was like, brother, welcome home. Like that's us too, right? We're all about that.
Yeah.
But there are people out there, like I've learned recently too, that actually like that stuff. I call them rule people. There are people who love the rules. They love rules for them. They love rules for you. They want everybody to follow rules, and it makes them feel safe, I think.
So, and look, maybe that's a good place to start, because when you ask a question about what are the blessing and benefits of decentralization, it's like, man, that's such an open-ended question. I could dive in from any direction. Let's start with rules. That's a good place to start. There are different kinds of rules, right? There are the kind of rules that regulate, for example, that dictate something. They tell you where to go, tell you what to do. That is this different kind of rule than, say, a protocol. So I know this is going to sound really abstract, and I'm not going to bore the crap out of your audience, but if you think about the rule drive on the right, how much order that brings to society. We don't want to live without rules. Likewise, the Bitcoin protocol gives rules that are vastly egalitarian with respect to your equality of opportunity, right? Doesn't guarantee equality of outcome, for example, but certainly like somebody working in the Federal Reserve is no different from somebody who's sitting in their basement on a podcast or in their attic or wherever your wife puts you, right? Though there is no difference in unless you just have a crappy wallet, but with respect to the Bitcoin protocol itself, it doesn't distinguish between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie or whatever. It is egalitarian in a good way. And so I'm all about rules. And in fact, I would say the way I look at it, and please, I don't want to scare you guys or your audience off, but I'm going to use the A word. It's even worse than the F word.
Oh, you're in good company. Don't worry.
Okay. So I consider myself an asymptotic anarchist. Okay. And it's like, I know that we may never get, if anarchy is defined is the complete diminishment, and let's call that axis complete diminishment of the threat of violence or violent action in the world from one human being to another, right? Which is what we all should strive for, because that means harmony and prosperity can follow. We want peace. So if peace is that axis, then our human arrangements can go along an asymptote, and I am not a mathematician, so forgive me if I butcher this, but it's a curve that approaches a line. But as I understand it, it never, with an asymptote, you may not ever actually reach the axis. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it gets closer and closer, but never actually gets there. So that's a kind of a long-winded, crazy way of saying I'm under no illusions. We may never get to anarchy, which is that state of pure peace. What we will get to is rules without rulers. right? Bitcoin is a paradigm example of rules without rulers. It's so decentralized. The mining and the decentralized aspects of its creation are completely rule governed. Without those rules, Bitcoin would not be possible. It's in the regulatory aspect where a third party intercedes between peaceful relationships, collaborative relationships, and so on, that we start to have problems. And it's like, okay, but Max, you know that there are going to be people in this world who are predators, who are sociopaths, who are going to try to take advantage of the weak or the stupid or whatever. And so there needs to be a Leviathan power to make sure that doesn't happen.
I call that sheepdogs.
Yeah. And all I'm saying is we don't need that to be a monopoly. On the way to asymptotic anarchy, we need to break that up into competitive either jurisdictions or different power centers, so that there's at least a stable equilibrium where if I have a right of exit and something is not serving me in this jurisdiction or this protective association or whatever, I can migrate to another one. And that is the power of exit, the power of mass migration, the power of leaving Bud Light. For example, when Dylan Mulvaney said, let's go get, whatever, that exit was powerful. And a lot of people said, nope, no more Bud Light.
It worked, yeah.
And so if people can wean themselves off fiat in the manner that you guys are trying to do, I'm sure, and we still have to, there are a lot of network effects around fiat that we can't avoid. But day by day, drip, 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 we're exiting the fiat system. And so long as we can do that, it's very promising. If you take that rationale and extend it to jurisdictions, then you can start to get some really interesting innovations. And I'll stop there. I want to talk about this idea of panarchy in a minute, but I want to stop there because I don't want to bang on and on without you guys.
Well, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, this is great.
Yeah.
Like I've learned a couple things already. So first of all, I've never heard really that definition, if I'm understanding you correctly. The way you're defining an anarchist is someone who wants maximum peace. That's really cool. That's a cool concept. I've never heard of it sort of defined that way, and I like it quite a bit. I also agree that it's impossible to achieve perfectly because, as you mentioned, there is evil in this world. There are people who they're evil. Like I'll just say it like it is. Like there are people who are fucked up, right? And they have no problem hurting other people. And I also some of them, right? Like not all of them. I'm a big fan of distinguishing the fact that so there's this thing where there's a lot of people who are like, I don't trust government or I don't like government. And it's like, look, it's not the government. There are people in the government. And we need to get really good as human beings at identifying the fact that there are individual people who are responsible for this bullshit. Just like there are individual people in the government who are just fine. They're good human beings, right? We can't just blanket the whole thing and say, if you're part of the government, you're automatically evil. That's a very naive way of looking at it, right?
No, in fact, you shouldn't do that. And do you ever? I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the old rapper Ice-T from the '80s.
Oh, absolutely. Randy knows him well.
But
Randy go way back.
I think Randy and I are the same age.
Actually, we both went to App State, by the way.
Oh,
did you really?
Excellent! All right.
Yeah.
So thank you for my accent.
I grew up listening to that guy's stuff, actually. So,
but he has he has this thing that he writes in one of his songs: "Don't hate the player, hate the game." Right. And when you look at when you look at the government, it's just like the Lord of the Rings. When you have a power that allows you to act with impunity, you change the incentive system.
Yeah.
When you change the incentive system, you change the behavior. When and the behavioral change can corrupt people's souls after time, if you want to look at it that way. And we call that evil. But there is the institutional substrate, the incentives that it creates,
Mhm.
And the people who are victims of that, and they're true sociopaths who usually climb to the top of a system like that. It's like, how are we going to get them out of there? It's like to think that we're going to install angels at the highest echelons of power, even if we don't think that these people are automatically evil. It's problematic simply because everybody who's in Congress right now, for example, or everybody who's in the administration of whatever administration, faces certain kinds of incentives to have and keep power. And as long as those incentives are in place, we're going to have to call them something, if not evil. But you're right. We shouldn't say that person is evil, although there are a couple I would.
Yes.
That's fair.
But
you and Matt Lohmeyer are going to get along just fine.
Yeah, it's really about the incentives, and it's really.
Yeah, I agree.
I am really into, for example, now going back to the practice of the virtues. I re-embraced Nietzsche, and then Nietzsche led me back to the ancient Greeks. And of course, the practice of the virtues among the Greeks was such an important thing. Like the idea that morality is an active, continuous practice, not a set of abstractions that you take off a sky hook, right. That to me is really meaningful. But incentive systems can mute people's practice of the virtues. So you guys, Jordan told me offline that you guys are active in your communities, which is awesome. But every incentive in the world in America right now, starting with your smartphones, all the way up to the fact that you pay your taxes to the regime, which is supposed to do welfare, right? Creates incentives that pull you out of your community, creates incentives that prompt you to outsource your responsibilities to distant capitals. We need to create incentives again, even if we have more local loci of power. Like if you have a locus of power in your community where somebody's like the mayor, or there's a, whatever, and it's a traditional kind of Republican form, if they know everybody's going to hit the exits when things start turning south, then that is a check on their ambitions, on their actions with impunity. We don't have that anymore. Everything's gone up and up and up and up.
Yep.
And more of the communitarian stuff, people don't know who their congressman is. People don't know who their mayor is.
People don't know who their city
anymore.
councilman is.
That's right. And that's where all the action is.
Who's sitting on the school board, for that matter.
Right. And of course, recently they've been getting into it because of COVID, and, the parents turned on their Zoom or whatever and heard the teachers talking about whatever garbage and realized that, oh my gosh, this needs to change, and became active. But had it not been for that, we would have gone blissfully along sending our kids to the indoctrination factories and outsourcing our responsibilities to Washington.
Yeah.
And that's the perverse incentives. And it's a loop. It's a perverse loop.
Totally agree with you. I would even go a step further and argue that this entire perverse incentive system was created with the founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913. The moment that essentially we created the fiat dollar and completely severed that from any sort of fiscal discipline whatsoever, allowed a situation where we could basically have unlimited, unchecked corruption forever. And when you have an environment like that where corruption is actually rewarded and honest work gets punished, you're obviously going to end up exactly where we are. Like it's like, I'd have to be an idiot to think that wasn't going to happen at some point based upon the current financial incentive system. And
what year was the income tax?
Same year, 1913. The two things were passed right together, right? The Federal Reserve System was created, and then income tax was passed at the exact same time. Not an accident, in my opinion, by the way. Yeah.
And I think another bad thing that happened that year was they changed the nature of electing senators.
Okay, that I didn't know anything about.
Yeah. So there had been a far more, if I'm not mistaken, states' rights element to the election of senators, where I think maybe it might have even been that state legislatures chose senators and sent them off or something like that. Whatever it was arguably a better check. What they did that year, and I think that was also 1913, is they concentrated more power in Washington by that. It's purported to be representative, but 1913, you're right, man. That was a terrible year to the
Terrible
Republic.
year. Yeah. And then, you know, the playbook basically was 1913 was the creation of the Federal Reserve. 1944 was Bretton Woods, where we got the entire world to agree to basically use the US dollar as the world's reserve currency and world trade currency. US at the time had the vast majority of the gold reserves of the world, something like 80% of the gold. And then, of course, you know, roll the clock forward to 1971. Nixon took us off the gold standard, closed the gold window forever. And really, ever since that moment, and in fact, there's this really hilarious website. It's called WTFHappenedIn1971.com. Yeah. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out.
Oh, yeah.
Just look at the charts. It will blow your mind, like how much everything has changed ever since then.
Yeah.
And it's really blown things up. And this concentration of power at a federal level, this thing that you brought up is really fascinating to me. This idea of exiting a really concentrated, powerful system that clearly isn't serving your interests anymore. Like, talk to us about that. What's that all about?
So I have this concept, and this is what I want to smack the technologists out there upside the head, because I can't do it. I'm not a coder. But we need an army of Satoshis, right? And so I have this, let's call it a threefold mandate called subversive innovation, okay? Subversive innovation goes like this. Reduce transaction costs. With whatever you do with your technology, you're reducing transaction costs. You're lowering the cost of interacting with someone laterally, right?
Yep.
Without the intercession of a third party. If you can eliminate the third party, you're reducing that transaction cost. Number two, raise predation costs. You make it harder and more costly for someone to treat you as prey or any other given person who uses the technology, including the banks, the government, whatever. And three, reduce exit costs. Make it easier to go from one system to another. Make that such that your technology has to depend on its benefits, its network effects. Otherwise, whether it's interoperability or whatever, or liquidity, token liquidity, for example, whatever it is. But that abstraction, that probably rather boring sounding threefold mandate for technologists, applies all over the place in the way we want to think about architecting systems, architecting new protocols. So let's assume that we went back to a situation where we really had 50 states, and that the enumerated rights, that they hadn't completely sullied the Constitution. And I'm not saying the Constitution is a perfect document. In a lot of ways, I mean, I really respect and admire it. I think it's flawed, and I think its flaws have meant its undoing. But let's say you could go back and interpret it with original meaning, such that the federal government couldn't do all the things it gets away with today. And those things were reserved to the states. And the states could be as dictatorial as you please or whatever. The sheer geographical proximity among the contiguous states, at least.
Yeah.
But also, you know, if you can get to Hawaii, Alaska, allows a new dynamic. If you could get unyoked the federal government off your back, right? And you had 50 experiments. There are so many ways you could see this what is known as jurisdictional arbitrage, competition among the states to increase. Right now, I mean, I just moved from Texas, which was just the reason I moved away from Texas was because it was flooded with people from California.
Mm-hmm.
Why was it flooded by people from California? Opportunity, taxes, better institutions, it's not better weather. California's
Mm.
got awesome weather. I mean, there's some bad things that happen in terms of like wildfires and things like that. And certainly that's got to be a consideration. But at the end of the day, quality of life in California is going down, down, down. And people are moving to Texas. I'm from North Carolina. Randy's and I share the same alma mater, apparently. And that, growing up in North Carolina, watching it just be flooded from people from the Northeast was a sight to behold. It was like, oh, what's going on here? And that persists to this day. But that jurisdictional arbitrage is happening on the most narrow band of stuff that states can do. Imagine if you blew that wide open right now and got the federal government off, and we had 50 real experiments treating those 50 as nation states.
Yeah, that's very.
Then you'd start to see some really interesting dynamics.
Have you ever talked with the 10th Amendment Center?
I know about those guys. Yeah. That's a really, it's amazing. I mean, I didn't want to interrupt you about the 10th Amendment Center, but
no, I was just wondering if you had, because it seems like that there's some stuff that needs to be worked on between you and them and probably the larger freedom movement here.
Yeah, I mean, the 9th and 10th Amendments are dead. They might as well not even be there. And nobody talks about it except the 10th Amendment Center and a few crazies like me. But if you look at the language of the 9th and 10th Amendment, 95% of the stuff that the federal government does right now is illegal, is unconstitutional.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I have it here. Let's read it. The 10th Amendment. Powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, meaning explicitly in the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, meaning the states have the authority and the federal government does not, unless it is explicitly given to the federal government. And so, you say it's dead. I'm gonna push back on that just a little bit and say that, I don't know that it's dead. I just think people have forgotten this and don't use it. And
that's literally, to me, the definition of dead.
However, you're starting to see situations where states are asserting their rights and saying, "Yeah, no, you can't do this," and they're specifically passing legislation that
CBDCs.
Yeah, you're seeing it. I mean, it's not. I think it's not happening enough, but it's happening more and more often, and that's encouraging.
If there is some sort of Lazarus who can bring back the 9th and 10th Amendments, it will be a Lazarus that will have a Supreme Court case that appeals directly to those amendments. When is the last time we've seen that?
Well, we haven't seen that, but you have seen examples of states exerting their rights, right? So the AG of Texas is doing it all the time now. He's constantly suing the federal government and winning, by the way, and getting Supreme Court decisions in the favor of the states. And you'll see him, and this it hasn't just been him. There have been other states who have basically pushed back in specific areas. They pass certain legislation, and then you see all the other states, or many of the states, I shouldn't say all, but many of the states pass legislation that almost mirrors exactly what that one state passed. And you see this across the board in terms of gun rights, constitutional carry. You see it. You're starting to see this where I think that some states are basically banning certain woke things from schools. And then the rest of them are just coming right behind and creating copycat legislation across the board. So they're not all doing it, but many are.
So I would say that it's not to say that states aren't pushing back and doing what they're legally permitted to do. What I'm saying is that the 9th and 10th Amendments, as far as I understand it, proscribe the federal government from doing certain things that are meant to be done by the states, and that's what's not happening.
Correct.
There is no
And
proscription of the federal government's behavior. There's no pushing back.
the only way is being pushed back on is suing the federal government, and basically you have to take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court must agree. Right.
Yeah.
That's essentially the pathway for recourse right now. The only one that's occurring.
It's funny, y'all, you know, because I can't help. I've never been able to shed my North Carolina accent, and now I live in South Carolina, which makes it even worse to be someone who's really into the idea of secession. but I am, and you know, not for those reasons. I sound like, I mean, some of my favorite philosophers are Yankee abolitionists, like Lysander Spooner, but I am at the same time. There is, I will say this, there is in the UN Charter this idea called the right of self-determination. And they make it sound so sweet and so special, but it's really just secessionism baked into the UN Charter. Now, I don't care anything about the UN, but it's funny how basically, essentially the same legal concept, it's not a legal concept that is in the United States anywhere. But if it were, I think we could. We could probably have a republic for another 100, 200 years.
It's the concept of exit, right? It's the concept of saying, look, your power is derived by the people. Like government's power, the reason laws exist. Have you ever read Bastiat?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, love that guy. If you've never read it, for those of you listening to this thing, check out The Law by Bastiat. I think it should be required reading in every American school. However, essentially,
I used to be the editor at Fee, by the way, and we used to produce that little volume. And
excellent. It's a fantastic book. He argues, and I agree, that law stems from natural rights, right? Law is just an extension. When you have government, when you have judicial systems, when you have law enforcement, this is just an extension of our natural rights. And none of these things would exist if not for the fact that we had human beings who had rights in the first place to protect, right? So government is supposed to be organized protection of our natural rights. And when you get to the point where the government becomes the oppressor and thinks it's in charge of the humans instead of representing the humans and protecting the humans' natural rights, at that point, then you should be able to say, yeah, screw you guys, I'm out. Which you say we don't have an example of that, but we actually do. It's called the Declaration of Independence.
Oh,
right?
I do say that. In fact, I wrote a whole book on it called Underthrow.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
We're on the same page with that.
The subtitle of that book is how Jefferson's dangerous idea will spark a new revolution. And that dangerous idea is the consent of the governed. That is the most important. That is the most important passage in the Declaration. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all that, which is a nod to Locke's natural rights. Okay, right. It's stirring, it's wonderful, but at the end of the day, if somebody points a gun at your head, they don't care about your natural rights.
Yeah, fair.
Right. And Jefferson's dangerous idea is fomenting this idea that if we don't have a right to switch out our government in the manner that we see fit, then we have a right to revolt, essentially. And that need not be violent. So what I try to do in articulating that in Underthrow is to say we have all kinds of nonviolent means of doing that these days. And of course, as a last resort, if it needs to be violence, so be it. But I really like the Gandhi path. You know, the British Raj was teetering at the edge. It was teetering in terms of the British's ability to maintain that in I guess it was 45, 43, something like that. And Gandhi came along with satyagraha, you know, this idea of ahimsa, nonviolence and said, we are just going to have throngs of people reminding you of what's right. We
Yeah.
don't want you here. Now, what came after, of course, in Nehru and all that stuff, man, they entered a dark age, which is sad, but not the point. The point is the British Raj did not have the consent of the governed. And so we can have mechanisms like that. But now, today, Bitcoin becomes an exemplar of how to do that through peaceful means, technological means, using subversive innovation. Going back to those three, Bitcoin is like, as you said, the apex predator of subversive innovation. It does all the things that I checked on that list.
Mhm.
I think that was a really good point about like, all right, so the Declaration of Independence basically says that we have the right to overthrow a government. If it's truly government of the people, then obviously if the people decide we don't like you anymore, it stands like as logical reason that you have the right to change it. Like, I don't think many people, even in today's world, would really argue with that. But I think a lot of people confuse that with meaning like, well, that means we need to get like a majority on board. But I think you need a strong enough minority that is just dedicated to this idea, this entire conversation, this whole concept that we're talking about. You need a big enough minority that believes that is like unmoving from that. And you start to convince more and more people. You could compare it literally to how Bitcoin got started as just kind of like an idea that sprung into a few people working on it, that sprung into a handful of people that were buying it or mining it and exchanging it, to where we are today, where we're still a minority, but I don't think it can be stopped. It's so big that it looks to be about to just snowball. So just take that same concept with government. If enough of us are just saying, no, we don't agree, we're not living this way, these are the rules we want to set up now, at some point either they have to capitulate or they have to admit that they are just corrupt individuals who are not running this country or any government for that matter. They are not running it for the benefit of the people. It is only being ran and manipulated by corrupt individuals. One of those two things has to happen. And if they have to admit that, if they have to show their hands, that brings over more people to our side. But again, I would like to reiterate that if you do this peacefully, you win people over to your side more, because you don't give the government the excuse of being, look at those violent people over there. Don't you want to just feel safe? Come over to us. And it's like, no, you're the ones being violent, and they're constantly just trying to be peaceful and say, leave us alone. We're not running this way anymore. We're doing our own thing. You can't really argue with those two dichotomies, and we're going to win more people over. It's just a matter of like building the society, educating the people, and getting some of that infrastructure built up, like you were talking about. I forget what you called it, but the reduce transaction costs, raise predation costs, and reduce exit costs. If we can technologically do that, like, game over. There's nothing that they can do against. We are just a giant wave smashing against the beach, and we're just destroying it with every oncoming wave, and the wave gets bigger and bigger. I don't care if you're a cliff face. Eventually, we're going to wear your ass out.
And especially with what we have right now, which is we have a federal government with debt that is 130+% of GDP. Right now, that's unsustainable. Like,
yeah,
I mean, at a certain point, it becomes unaffordable to enforce all of this stuff. And then, it's like all this started as a protection racket. Okay, you Jordan, you got into James C. Scott a little bit, and I love James C. Scott. And he basically says, you had on about the time of settled agriculture, you had two types. You had the grain makers and the grain takers.
Mm.
Grain makers were real good at making grain, and grain takers were bad MFs, right? And when the grain takers would come along and kill the grain makers, there wasn't any more grain. So they didn't want to kill them. They just wanted to scare them. And they said, look, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. There's going to be other bad MFs like me that come along. I'm going to protect you from them. And in exchange, you're going to give me a certain percentage of your grain when I come around. Cyclically, every quarter or whatever, however often they need grain, I guess. That, folks, is the creation of the state right there. Yep. That happened everywhere with settled agriculture. Those blossomed into empires. So if you think about it as a kind of perverse contract, a protection racket, it's mafia stuff. It's no different.
Yep.
If you think of it as mafia dynamics, if they can no longer provide the things that they say they're going to in their quote unquote social contract, controlling the border, crime, money supply, all this stuff, all of these agreed upon myths that we've come to accept because we've been inured to the protection racket so long. If we see there's no longer a good deal there and we have the numbers, at a certain point, people are going to say, like in Idaho, in Oregon, no, we're now a part of Idaho, and you're just going to have to accept that. Sorry. It's like, what are you going to do? You're broke, and we've got more men and more guns. It's like,
well, I mean, maybe, right? Like there's different scenarios that can play out. Like you brought up
for sure
in India. Ideally, you do it peacefully, and eventually they might have to go to guns. And if they do, the net effect of that is that they lose the moral high ground. They lose the mandate of the people, because if they're just blatantly and out in front of everyone using force, then the entire public is going to turn against them. It's going to be like, look, you're clearly the assholes here, right?
Yeah, we've got to see that soon. I mean, I can't. To me. And this is, I mean, you guys are clearly in this boat. Like, you guys see what's going on. You started the conversation saying that basically we've been on this road since 1913. That's over 100 years now. Yeah. So like now all that's left, we're at the point where we're just sitting around waiting on collapse.
Yeah, 100%. Not only are we sitting around waiting on collapse, we're sitting around waiting on an accelerated collapse because, and this is basic math stuff. Yeah. What is the target rate of inflation according to the Federal Reserve? It's 2%.
2%. Yeah.
So it's 2%, but that's 2% every year. So if it's 2% every year in math, this is what we call a compounding function, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So how does compounding work? Well, on a graph, it looks like nothing for decades, right? Until it doesn't, at which point it goes straight up.
It turns geometric. I didn't realize
it turns
that.
geometric. Yeah.
And it's done that.
The math works. Yeah. Yep. So if you think about it like this, right? We've been doing this since 1971. What is that? 29 plus 24 years. 53 years. We're in the vertical part, which means it's going to continue to accelerate exponentially. Yeah. Which means that more and more people are going to be like, yo, what the hell? Yep. The basic math doesn't work. My income does not keep up with the pace of rent, does not keep up with the pace of gas prices, does not keep up with the pace of grocery prices. This is broken. WTF. Right? And it leads to the smartest members of the society starting to figure out, look, we are caught in a debt spiral that cannot be pulled out of, so it's only a matter of time. Once people start figuring that part out, right? So it's kind of like if it's the Titanic has hit the iceberg, right? The lower compartments are flooding, right? The ship is starting to tilt, but just a little bit, right? The people are still in the dining area, in the ballroom, having a great old time. But some of the engineers are looking at the ship's plans and are going, yeah, we're fucked. and they're moving towards the lifeboats, excuse me. The people who are moving towards the lifeboats, in my opinion, are the people who are buying Bitcoin right now. They're figuring out what's going on.
Do you think that's what's happening with price right now? That's what's moving the price?
I think it's a combination of all the different things. I think we are literally dematerializing and repricing every asset on the surface of the planet. B, the ETFs have opened the floodgates to the largest capital market in the world. And we it could be argued that Bitcoin has never really been fairly priced before, because if you don't have access to the capital markets of the USA, how do you really know? You don't. It's that. And I think it's going to be a self-reinforcing effect. Why? Because Bitcoin is a unique asset in the history of mankind. We've never had anything with a finite number before. So what's going to happen with that? Well, the floodgates are now open. The capital markets now have access. We're only scratching it's just like, if this was like imagine like this, like there's a dam and there's a gigantic gate, and the gate is starting to open. It's just like cracked just a little bit, and water starting to come out. That thing's going to keep opening and keep opening and keep opening. How do we know that? Well, financial advisors, registered investment advisors, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo Wealth Management just announced they're just now, a month later, 2 months later, going to allow their clients to buy the ETFs. And this will continue to unlock over the next 12 months. The gates are going to continue to open, right? So what do you have happening? You've got ETFs buying 10,000 Bitcoin in a day, and the natural supply is 900. That's what's happening. It's just math, man. This is not like hocus pocus. It's not like religious. Bitcoin is awesome. It's math, guys. It's supply and demand. You have this massive demand running up against the limited supply. It has to go up.
You also have. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jordan. Go ahead.
Well, I think you also it's kind of like what is the saying? The necessity is the mother of invention. Like, I feel like I think people saw the writing on the wall decades ago, started working towards. There's this cool graphic we have that it shows, like, it's not just like when Bitcoin started, it's when like the cypherpunks were doing everything in the background and all the things that, like, with the internet and encryption that had to build up to get to that point. Everybody's kind of been working on that. And it kind of, a lot of people will be like, well, isn't it convenient that this is happening right when like the global economic system's about to collapse? And it's like, well, it's more people saw the writing on the wall and started working towards this. If this wasn't here right now, people would not be as bought into the propaganda would still be working if there wasn't an exit. Like, if the dollar was the best, everyone around the world would still be rushing to the dollar. There'd still be demand for the dollar if Bitcoin didn't exist. And so it would prop itself up a little bit longer. But because there is this asset that people can flee to, they're doing it in droves because everyone sees the writing on the wall. And
yeah, I mean,
just kind of
the exorbitant privilege of Bretton Woods and really the petrodollar gave us meant we got to live a flush life. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, now that there's something that reveals the cracks, I mean, because all the only thing that the dollar's got going for it is that every other currency in the world is worse.
Yep.
And I guess, now that we can see with Bitcoin, beyond the volatility, beyond the whales playing, it used to be that whales could manipulate the market for Bitcoin rather easily. Is that possible now as it becomes more and more, or wider and wider adoption?
Isn't it something like 79% of all Bitcoin has not moved in the past year plus?
I think 2 years, maybe.
It might even be 2 now. Like, so those are all the people that held all the way at the bottom that we're never going to sell. As Preston Pitch said on our show, like, these are the people that were beat over the head until they were down on the ground bleeding and still would not sell, that are holding on. And so these ETFs are fighting over 21%. Oh, by the way, we're all these other people are still buying. So there's 20% of the supply that they're fighting over.
What
the way
does
I look at it-
Grayscale and all those and Coinbase and all those have? How much do they have by percentage?
Give me a second. I'll pull it up. But what I was going to say is, like, in relation to what Jordan was just saying a minute ago, we have now mined 93.5% of the total supply of Bitcoin that will ever be mined in the history of the human race, which means that 6.5%, the other 8 billion people on the planet, have to fight over the last 6.5% of Bitcoin. And yes, you're right. There was a time where whales were able to somewhat manipulate the markets, but nowadays, and I see this directly, like from personal experience, this is anecdotal, but I have a fairly good view on it because I work with Swan, which is one of the larger sort of on-ramps in Bitcoin. I work in the private division, which means we see very large clients, you know, in some cases doing extremely large amounts of business. And I can tell you that the behavior is every time that Bitcoin drops, call it 8%-ish, our phones start ringing. So I think that what we're going to see going forward is we're going to see more and more of this kind of activity where it's like, if there's a dip, here's the way I put it.
Man, I'm like a, it's like chum in the water. Whenever
Bro,
there's a crash,
like,
I'm like,
yeah. And but see, you and all of us too, right?
Yeah.
So every Bitcoiner who understands what Bitcoin is, every Bitcoiner who gets anybody who's walked through what I call the one-way door, right? Once you figure out the part about it's a finite asset, there will never be any more, right?
You don't go
That's
back.
when the light bulb starts to go on. You're like, holy crap. So if there's a dip, all of us are buying. Now, here's the important part to understand about that. Every single day, more people walk through that door. So there are more people who are going to buy that dip every day. And the numbers continue to grow.
Let me ask you this, because you guys know more about Bitcoin, and I want to learn. I want to learn from you. I wish we had more time. But here's one thing I've always been concerned about. What if they block the exits? What if they get rid of the on-ramps or the convertibility of fiat to Bitcoin? What if that happens?
That is a great question. And let me just answer it before I try to continue to find this piece of data you were asking about. So, first of all, yes, they can make stuff illegal. Yes, they can create regulation. Yes, they can block the on-ramps. Yes, they can do all this kind of stuff. Will that stop Bitcoin? No, it will not. Right? So just look at history. How many times have they made certain things illegal? Has it stopped people? Like, if there's enough interest from human beings, it doesn't stop people. Did prohibition stop people from drinking? Not really. Did marijuana laws stop people from smoking marijuana? Not really. Right? Look at China. China has some of the most strict capital control laws in the world. Did that stop the Chinese from sending money offshore? It did not. Right?
No.
Humans will find a way around that kind of stuff. But even if they did, let's pretend for a second that they did all that. They closed the on-ramps. They made it illegal. They scared the crap out of everybody. And they're like, okay, well, you can't use the traditional rails to get your wealth into Bitcoin. Let's go back to first principles. What creates wealth?
Productivity.
Human labor. Human productivity, right? You have your base stuff, your survival stuff. Once you get your food, your shelter, your protection from the elements, your basic survival, your security, right? Everything above that essentially is luxury, right? It's optional what you put that money into. You go to work, you create, you do services, you have a company, whatever the case may be, you're creating wealth, right? You can trade that directly for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and that's been my hope, except for the Gresham's Law stuff, you know.
Sure, but both will take place until it doesn't. Like, look at the
Yeah.
history of mankind. Look at the history of every failed currency ever. What happens? You have a preferred currency and you have a less preferred currency, right? So what ends up happening? People save in the preferred currency, they spend the less preferred currency. And that just continues to happen until it's completely replaced. There's no reason that'll change. It's just, the humans are going to do the same thing. So you'll have this preferred currency, let's call it Bitcoin. Then you have this unpreferred currency, let's call it like United States CBDC dollars or whatever the hell it is, right? What's going to happen? Well, people will spend the CBDC dollars, they'll buy real stuff, and then they're going to give it to Randy for Bitcoin. That's what's happened throughout all of history. It will never change. It's going to continue to happen.
The harder the fist of tyranny squeezes, the easier the waters of freedom will seep through.
Do you think that Bitcoin, the other thing is anonymity, pseudonymity, right? And the blockchain forensics that have developed where you can trace who owns what transactions, who to whom. Do you think that the mixers and other layers that ensure anonymity for wallets are the future?
Look, there's tons of ways that people can interact with each other with Bitcoin that breaks those types of. First of all, a lot of people assume that chain analysis type stuff is like the holy grail of figuring stuff out. It really isn't. All right. They have a business. They have an incentive to sell their business. They have an incentive to say they can do certain things. Law enforcement has a certain amount of incentive to make you think that they can do certain things. Right. But at the same time, there's lots of ways to do things in Bitcoin that are basically essentially impossible to figure out. Right. You could mine Bitcoin. You could send it to a wallet that has no ties to you as a person whatsoever. Right. You could trade Bitcoin in a local economy using Lightning, which traverses multiple different hops of individual users' nodes. Right. Good luck tracking that down.
So Lightning is anonymous?
Well, it's not completely anonymous, but the amount of effort that would be required to figure out what the fuck just happened far outweighs the value that you're going to corral by doing it.
Well, that's good. Right? That's just raise. I mean, it's like if you may not ever be able to raise predation costs to infinity or enforcement costs, if you like. Well, but you can raise them high enough to make any given person really difficult.
Right. Yeah. Like let's say you have a group of law enforcement or investigators or whatever, and it costs them $100,000 worth of resources to track down $500 worth of transactions. Is it really worth it?
Or even 80,000?
It's not. It's not worth it. That doesn't make any sense. Right. So there's that. And then, the new, we call them second, third, fourth layer technologies being built on the Bitcoin main chain, things like Fedimints and things like that. Like in the next couple of years, it's going to be very, very difficult I think for a lot of that. If someone wants to operate in a fairly private way, I think that's going to be very possible. It's not going to be hard to do. It's not going to be out of the reach of people. And I do not think that the cost of predation will be lower than the value that they're trying to extract from you.
Here's another one for you guys because have more expertise on this, but this is more speculative. Okay, the Austrian economists, you guys are probably aware to some degree, have this idea of time preference, and Bitcoiners love the idea of time preference. Mm-hmm. The idea that it changes your incentives not to eat the seed corn. So forget about Gresham's law. Imagine Bitcoin comes to dominate. And Bitcoin is the primary mechanism through which we move value around the world for exchange, both savings and exchange. You might develop some little companion stable coin of some sort, I don't know. But if it's going into fewer other competitors like a fiat, then it's going to stabilize. So you're going to have less volatility anyway. But in terms of time preference, what does the world look like in terms of human behavior under a Bitcoin dominant regime? How do you guys see that? Because that's kind of a vision that I would like to paint, but I always feel like I have some blocks in imagining the time preference. How do you see it working?
It's price of tomorrow right here.
Yeah. I think, Randy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there's a book called Price of Tomorrow. What's the guy's
Jeff Booth.
Jeff Booth. I just finished reading that. He paints this picture of what it looked like under a deflationary cycle, and so we have lived in the grip of inflationary narrative for so long now that we deflation is a big evil, right? Well, in a Bitcoin standard, it turns into a deflationary cycle. And he paints this picture of where technology will continue to evolve. Things will get cheaper based on technology. And if we price things in Bitcoin, it that maintains and it spreads throughout humanity. People are incentivized to save. They will spend basically for only what they really want. They will look at that cost benefit analysis of, am I going to spend my Bitcoin on a house? Well, yeah, I got to have a place to live, and I'm going to spend it on a tractor. Maybe, yeah, probably. But am I going to spend it on, something stupid? Probably not. I'm going to spend something else on that. So it paints he paints a really interesting picture, and I recommend check out some of his YouTube videos where he talks to Preston.
Oh, he's
Fish
amazing.
Like
yeah, I love Jeff Booth. He's great.
So
that's kind of where my head goes intuitively, is that there's not this extravagance. We still spend money because we have to meet our needs, but we stop short. People are more thrifty like they were in the old days. Mm-hmm. Like we don't even use the word thrift anymore. That's how long we've been in the inflationary cycle.
How would you
turn to more spiritual things, more communitarian
100%,
things?
100%.
Yes.
How would you describe economics today? How would you describe economic activity today?
Spend.
It's consumerism, right? The whole idea is spend it as soon as you get it, right? And what are people manufacturing today? What are producers of goods manufacturing today? They're manufacturing stuff that intentionally breaks. There's no quality in it anymore. Why? Because the whole thing is spend. Throw that away, buy more. Creates an incredible amount of waste. It's very destructive for the environment. We have trash in tons and tons and mountains of trash in the oceans, on the beaches, on and on and on, right? From all the garbage that we're just consuming and throwing away and consuming and throwing away. So if you have a low time preference, if you're sitting on sats and you're thinking these sats are going to continue to get worth more and more over time, I'm only going to spend it on the very best things to buy. That changes the entire system of economics we have today. Every manufacturer on the planet, in order just to survive, is going to have to build something good that people want, that it's going to last. They're going to have it turns all of human society back into a meritocratic function where we're trying to do the best. We're trying to be the best. We're trying to create the best. We're trying to provide the best services. And like you said, not only does it create a world where we're being better stewards of the planet, we're not being so wasteful, we're not just blowing money on stupid shit that we throw away and we buy again next year and over and over and over and over again, right? But on top of that, we have more time, which is the most precious asset that human beings have. Because your wealth is increasing over time instead of decreasing over time. You spend less time running on the hamster wheel, chasing the dollar to try to keep up with prices running away. What does that allow? It allows you to calm the hell down, think about life, spend more time with your family, go touch grass, put your feet in the ground, ground yourself, do and figure out Why are we here? How can I better serve my fellow man? It releases a tremendous amount of human potential. And like I'm talking about a renaissance the human race has never seen before.
How many
is coming.
people Alex, that was the most beautiful monologue that you just gave. It was so beautiful. It was so perfect. We need 1,000 people giving that rather than we're going to 100,000 this year. You know what I mean?
That's what we're building here, though. Like, and that's why we're trying to connect with other tribes like yours who think the same way, to say, like, these are the messages to push. This is the future that we're talking about. This is the revolution that we're in right now. Most people don't have the opportunity because they don't have the internet and the ability to reach out to people all across the world and talk about these things. Never before, I think, in the history of the world has anyone ever understood that they were living through a revolution as it was happening. Certainly not so early on in it.
Yeah.
But we are, and we can wake up more people and let them know, like, we're not waiting for a gunshot to say this thing happened. We're just going to tell you, like, it's already happening. Get on board. And like I talked about the wave earlier, like, just get on this wave and keep smashing into the system.
Absolutely. I mean, and that beautiful vision that you guys get, I mean, I guess I'm the writer. I guess I need to get busy. You know, like, we gotta.
Let's do it.
That to me, that time preference thing. When you start talking about time preference, people are like, "What?" But when you explain that it changed, that a deflationary century will change the incentives, so that people turn back to the things that matter. And it's not to say that we're anti-capitalist. Quite the contrary. Capitalism gives us the bounty, but consumerism does not. It's monetary Keynesianism. Spend. That's not what we need. We need to be able to arrest time again. And that's what's beautiful and powerful about Bitcoin. What you said, Alex, that was, it's to seize control of our time again. In fact, I've got a veteran buddy who said that to me one time, and now I get exactly what he means.
Yeah. So I sense this is the beginning of a long and prosperous relationship, Max Borders. We're gonna do some cool stuff.
Hell yeah.
I can't wait. You guys are awesome. It's just such an honor to sit and chat with you guys, and a lot of fun too. I've never done anything like this. Tipping them back too. That's even extra fun.
Let's go. Keeping it real.
You've been on the wrong shows before. I mean, or we're starting a new format that, you know, as we're describing, as people's time preference gets a little lower and they start figuring out what works best, and everyone's going to start going to this. But remember, it started here, folks.
All right, we have a really interesting question coming in from Fritz. He's saying, Max, talk about the gray robes. What is this thing?
Okay, so the gray robes is, if I had to put it into a little soundbite, it would be, I want to, with other people, mind you, create the Freemasons of decentralization. In other words, the Freemasons were an order, are an order that goes way back to the Knights Templar, and even before that, to the Roman legions before that, apparently. And the power of a fraternal organization is that you, first of all, you don't outsource your sense of responsibility to distant capitals. The lodge system means you look at your brother in the eyes, you help your brother when he's down, or you say, you need to get up, you need to put down the drink, or whatever it is that your brother needs. You supply that, not through some algorithm in Washington, right? You supply it as a human being and as a person. That's the first thing that they did. But then they had initiatic experience, something that said, "Oof, we are now brothers that transcend." Same thing that you guys have in the military. I know you do. I've heard too many stories about it. The sense of solidarity with other human beings, doesn't matter what their race is, doesn't matter what their creed is. You will be lifelong brothers. They have that. You need that connection. Asabaya, it's called in Arabic. And that connection that the Freemasons are able to have, I don't really believe so far. I think right now the developer community, the technologists who are creating the network state concepts from Balaji Srinivasan, you guys might have heard about Balaji. If that Jordan, make that your next book, The Network State. Okay. The developer community and I know that you guys are maxis, but whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, there are a lot of smart people out there and they need to harness their energies around something important, not bullshit. My belief is that the gray robes can, as we start to go through another cycle where the first stage of the cycle is the pioneering cycle, where we're staking out new territory, even if that territory is digital. We need a beating heart. We need a moral core. We need something around which we can coalesce that's more important than just incentives or money or mooning. A mooning token. I don't give it, I don't care if I sit on my Bitcoin till doomsday, as long as I have human connection, like with you guys or my kids. That the stuff that is important, reconstituting that, putting at the center of human endeavor, and building solidarity around that moral core. That's what the gray robes are about. It's philosophical. It's doctrinal. That's missing in life right now. People gave up on church. Not everybody, but a lot of people gave up on church. And it's like, look, if you're going to give up on church, you're going to find there's a hole missing. There's something missing, and it's left a hole in you somewhere.
Yep.
And if you're not religious in the traditional sense and you don't have a faith tradition, the gray robes may be a home for you. And I'm not saying it should be a replacement for religion. I have a funny saying I say with my buddies, and I'm hoping Fritz is going to come to the course, is that the gray robes want to meet on Thursday night and you can go to church on Sunday, which is to say that we used to have an army in this country in the turn of the 20th century. And I don't know if Fritz, I want to know later whether you guys had this down in Central America or South America, if you had the equivalent of this. But we had an army of fraternal societies. We had a whole empire of fraternal societies in the country before that were destroyed by the welfare state in the 20th century, completely crowded out. To reconstitute that for spiritual reasons, for a sense of kindredness and solidarity and community activity, the likes of which that you guys are building right now, I want to represent the sort of priesthood aspect of that, if you like.
Yep.
The intellectual and moral center. And that's why I'm saying, like, when Jordan reached out, I'm like, yes, because you guys are actually doing this stuff. You're building community. You're doing this. You already intuitively get the moral priors.
Yeah.
And
Max Borders, we are on the same wavelength, my man. We are speaking the same language. We are doing the same thing. Like, you are talking about creating this fraternal order of like smart guys, brainiacs, nerds, whatever the hell you want to call them. We're doing the same thing with the grunts and the knuckle draggers and the warriors.
I know better. That right? You guys are teaching me stuff all night. I know better.
But here's the thing. This is what we get and we agree upon. This sense of honor, this sense of fraternal order, right? absolutely missing from male society in Western countries, must be restored. Completely agree. We agree upon this idea of initiation and honor and earning your way into positions of respect. We agree upon all that kind of stuff. And then just this idea that you must have this code of honor among men. And like, we're all about resurrecting that, man. We are doing events throughout the year that we're getting guys to come in. We're going to be doing man stuff. We're going to be getting, I mean, the whole idea is to get, just get around. I mean, and it's not about getting together and just like, you know, I'm tougher than you are, because nobody is as tough as Randy. But it's about providing an environment where you can get around guys who are pretty strong, and you can learn from them, and you can be like, okay, I can put my ego on a shelf for a minute because there's shit tons I can learn from these dudes. I'm just going to hang out and I'm going to absorb it. And it's going to challenge me in a lot of ways. I'm going to be uncomfortable as fuck because it's going to point out weaknesses that I have. But if I have enough courage to go, okay, I'm screwed up in that area, but I'm going to pay attention, I'm going to get better, it will make us all stronger. And by doing that, it's going to make our countries stronger. It's going to make our communities stronger, our villages stronger, and our tribes stronger.
And one thing that you guys told me offline, Jordan, I think it was you who said, you guys don't just have Americans in your group.
That's correct. Yeah.
And like Fritz, I'm pretty sure is from Peru. And like, this is happening. One of my fellow gray robes, you know, call him high priest. It's fun for right now, but that stuff could get serious in terms of like understanding that as this coalesces, you need to have that honor code. You need to have that respect. You need to have that. It's not a dominance hierarchy. It's a hierarchy of achievement, right?
Yeah.
And participation. But he's Swedish. You know, this has to be international.
Yeah.
And that's the Freemasons did that too. What they connected on was that common doctrine. And that is so powerful that we need to be bound in the ideas of decentralization so that we can colonize the world with that.
Yep.
So real quick, I just want to do a plug for Max regarding the gray robes, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. And I think I'm good to say this. So Max has talked to the people kind of, I guess, where that you're getting the tickets from, and we can get the scholarship. They've knocked down the price to like the scholarship level. I believe this is for like anybody that we can get kind of signed up can get in at the scholarship level. I believe maybe that's a limit too, but I think Max has offered to anybody that's in like a financial situation where that is what's holding them back, like get in touch with us. And Max has offered to cover the cost for up to 10 people. And so I think I'm signing up. I'm going to pay for it, but we will like reach out into the community and see who wants to sign up and pay to go and who might need some help. But that, correct me if I had any of that wrong, Max, but
yeah, I can do, what did I tell you? I can do up to 10 or up to, I can do up to 10.
But I think we can also probably raise some money within our community too to help.
Well, and I can get, and like, Fritz, the young man who's cool, is on this call. I'm so psyched. I can't wait to meet you. He's going to be doing it, I think. And he is, he's a student. So I'm like, I got him a student discount, but I don't care if you're Bitcoin rich. I would love to do a soldier's discount. So just reach out to me, whatever your circumstances. If you're watching this, if you're interested in doing the gray robes thing, I'll make sure that we do whatever we need to do to get you onboarded.
Awesome. All right. So we've been going for an hour and 22 minutes now, not including our pre-gaming time, which was fun too. So we're kind of nearing the end of the official pod time. Randy, Jordan, do either of you guys have any special questions or pressing questions or topics that you want to discuss with Max? And then I suggest that we go to story time.
The only thing, I'm just gonna like fanboy for a minute here because I've always been a reader. I've always loved to read, and the guys in all the chats know, like, yeah, I'm just the nerd that's always telling everybody about the book I'm reading. And so it was really cool to like reach out to you and for you to reach right back out and like be available and have all these conversations. Like that's super exciting for me as just a fan of like reading cool, interesting books that make me learn and think. So thank you for that. There's a million more conversations that I wish we could keep having here. But I know we'll continue the email correspondence and keep building and keep growing. So I just wanted to fanboy for a minute and get that off my chest.
Shoot, man, that makes me feel great because I feel the same. I feel like I can't wait to get together with you guys somewhere out in the woods or something like that. As a matter of fact, you guys are going to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna do everything I can to do that. In fact,
We got to get you there.
If you're able to come out a day earlier or whatever, we're going to be doing a range day on the 25th, I believe it is. So if you want to get out there and do some man stuff, we're gonna be shooting guns. Randy is a former SEAL sniper and intelligence guy. He's going to be one of the instructors. We've got Shane Hazel, who's a former Force Recon special operations guy. We've got a handful of other guys that are either former military special operations or whatever the case may be, all fully qualified. It's going to be a great time. So it's just one of the things we're doing.
That's excellent. No, I'd be so into that. I just took my boys shooting for the first time last weekend and they're hooked. It's kind of scary. Like, oh boy, I'm going to sport this habit.
Bitcoin.
Randy, you got anything?
No, that was good. I got 1,000 questions, but that's a good place to end it.
All right. So before we end it, usually what we'll do, Max, is we do what we call story time. So for all of our guests, we ask you to tell a story from your life that is generally funny, oftentimes having to do with hardship. So for example, like military guys will tell stories of like stuff they went through that oftentimes were really freaking crappy at the time, but in hindsight, they're pretty hilarious. So has anything ever happened to you that you thought was really challenging, maybe, or difficult or embarrassing, but in hindsight helped you grow a lot, or is funny, or really any story you want to tell is fine too?
Oh man, I wish I had been able to think about this in advance. I got on this podcast at 8:30 in the evening and got drunk and embarrassed myself, and it ended up on the internet. No, that's now. Let's see. Story time from your life that it was funny when it happened. No, it was funny now, but when it happened,
or you learned something really great from it, or it was
Yeah.
challenging or embarrassing or difficult or painful or whatever. Because military guys, we tend to have this really dark sense of humor oftentimes, right? And it's part of dealing with some of the stuff that we deal with. But you know, either like, you know, we have stories from boot camp or stories from like just ops that went really weird or things that happened. Like, what was something that happened to you that's really difficult or challenging or funny?
Well, I can tell you one it's relatively recent, but it's embarrassing because I was so starstruck and I was such an idiot fanboy that I couldn't do it. But I was living in Austin. I just moved from Austin here to South Carolina about 6-7 months ago. And prior to that, a few months before I left, I was visiting friends in Austin. And I was invited to attend this Jeffersonian dinner, which is just a style of dinner where you talk about an issue and you bounce around and have conversations with people about a certain issue, which is really good fun, right? Well, I noticed I had asked if I could bring my baby mama with me, and they're like, no, we only have a certain number of chairs and we only have room for one as far as inviting you. So I noticed that at this table of 10, there were 2 chairs missing. I'm like, well, she could have come because they didn't, whoever that was. Well, as the night progressed, I'm finishing up my dinner and just, and all of a sudden walks in Elon Musk and Grimes. Plops down, and their little kid, they have like a toddler, like a 3-year-old. And he plops down and just joins the conversation. And I almost, voided my bowels right there in my pants. But I had the opportunity to meet Elon Musk, to talk to him. And I felt like such garbage. I'd stayed up late the night before. I didn't really want to come that night. And there was Elon Musk. I ended up talking to Grimes at the end of the evening. And she said, I hear you have a 3-year-old too. We should do a play date together. Yeah, let's do a play date. I'll get us in touch. And I didn't have the sense to get her damn phone number. I could have been hanging with Elon and Grimes, and I'm not like the kind of person who does that. So I didn't even know how to do it. I'm not a networker. I was just, so in hindsight, I think the embarrassing thing was I had the opportunity. And I came in and I said hello before I left, but that was it. I totally botched it. Right. Every other person in the world would have found some creative way.
So did you figure it out? Do you know what you need to do from here on out?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. From here, like I'll be ready at Bitcoin 2024. There'll be all kinds of interesting people. I'll have a shtick.
Here's the move. You literally pull out your phone right there on the spot and say, okay, let me text you so I can get your contact.
Yeah.
You do it right there on the spot. You verify, say, text me back.
You get her number, Max. That's what you,
there you
go. ABC, always be closing. Never stopped applying. You just had to apply it to new targets.
Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation, Max. I can tell you're a very deep and thoughtful guy. Really looking forward to getting to know you better and collaborating with you. I'm very excited about that mission that you're on. Hope we can find ways where you can participate in our mission too. I think they're very aligned. So I've really had a great time.
My pleasure, my honor. Thank you so much, guys.
All right. All of you out there, thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate all of you guys, everybody that's out there. This is Bitcoin Veterans. We do this every Thursday night, starting at about 7 p.m. Eastern. And you've already heard us talk about the mission, but I do want to tell you that even though there's a few of us that get on here and we talk about stuff, there's a whole army of people that actually make it happen. Bitcoin Veterans is a big organization. It's growing every single day. We're adding more people every single day. And just a shout out to the crew, all the guys out there who are basically in the trenches making things happen that you don't see on this show. They're actually far more important than we are because our job is easy. We just get on this thing and talk. These guys are like doing the thing. So appreciate and love all of you. That's it. Bitcoin Veterans, we will see you again next week. Good night, everybody.
And Max, if you want to just